Welcome to Danny's Maths Hub for a brand new set of lessons, and I think this one is going to quite possibly be a noisy one. Now there's a reason I'm stood here, is because I've got two signs beside me. One that says 100 meters and the other one signaling 100 kilometers per hour. And that's because I am on a running track right next to a highway. So why am I located here? Well, because today's lesson is going to be all about distances. And I love the fact we've got two things right next to each other that can show us two different types of measurements in one go. And hopefully the traffic going past isn't going to be too much of an issue. Now, before I begin the rest of the lesson, if you're enjoying the work I do, if you're enjoying the lessons, if you're learning something, please do hit that subscribe button. It really helps out, lets me know how many people are watching and actually enjoying what I've got on offer. So the more subscribers, the more content I'm willing to make, and then the more you can learn. So over the course of the next few lessons, we're going to build ourselves up to be able to not only plot, but also read off information from a distance time graph. And eventually, hopefully, be able to work out certain speeds from a distant time graph. But before we can do any of that, we need to understand exactly what this distance means. Well, distance is a one-dimensional quantity, and it measures the space, it measures the distance between 2 points. Now, there's lots of words we can use for distance: height, depth, width, length. Okay, there's lots of different words, and they all mean the same thing. They all measure the distance between one point and the other. For example, for instance, if we want to know the distance between the bottom of the buildings and the top of the building, then we'd refer to this distance as a height. If we look at the distance of the two edges of the car, then we'd mostly call this the width of the car. And for example here, I am right next to the 100-meter sign. That means we are 100 meters away from the start line of this running track. So that's a distance. Start to here is 100 meters. However, there are several different units of measurement. And not only that, there's actually two systems we can use to measure. We have the imperial system and the metric system. Now, the metric system is used across the world by the majority of countries. And the metric system involves millimeters, centimeters, meters, and kilometers. And then we have the imperial system, not quite as used as much as others, but it is still found across the world. We have inches, feet, yards, and miles. Now, there are many countries on the metric system, including Bahrain, where we are right now, but then you still have countries like the US who use the imperial system. And it's not just distances that are split up into two. We also have weight and volume that is also split up between metric and imperial. And we also have countries that say that they're metric. For instance, the UK, they claim they're metric. They claim they follow the rest of the European countries and work with the metric system, but yet all their roads are in miles, so that's technically the imperial system. So it's always important to know both systems. And today we're just going to take a little step at looking at what these systems are. And I'm going to start off with the metric system. Now, a millimeter is very, very small. It's quite a small measurement. For instance, the pinhead, okay, if you look at a pinhead, that is about 1 millimeter wide. Obviously, they do vary, but a standard pinhead is about 1 millimeter. And if you were to get your 30 centimeter ruler out, and you see there's lots of little dashes between 0 and 1 centimeter, that's a millimeter. And then going up from a millimeter, we have a centimeter. And that's usually about the thickness of a pencil. And again, it can be found on your 30 centimeter ruler. We then move up to a meter. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have seen your teacher with a meter stick, either drawing on the whiteboard, using it to point to things, or sometimes just leant up against the drawers, not being used at all. And that's 1 meter. We then jump up to a kilometer, and that's 1,000 meters. Okay, that's the 100-meter running track here 10 times. And that's the metric system. We're working with small objects, millimeters, we get bigger, centimeters, then meters, and then kilometers. However, the imperial system starts off with inches. There is a smaller version called a xi, but that's not used very much, and it tends to be inches, and it's worked out if it's smaller than an inch, a quarter of an inch, half an inch, and so on. It then moves up to feet, which is actually 12 inches. It's the size of your 30 centimeter ruler is 1 foot. And then after a foot, we get a yard. And then after a yard, it goes up to miles. And they're the two systems. But why do we need to know this? And why is there different units of measurements within each system? Well, it's because the things on our Earth, things on this planet, the things in the universe, they're all different sizes. So if we take a look at this grain of sand here, if we just take a look at one piece of grain of sand that you won't even be able to see in the camera, does it sense to measure this grain of sand with the same units as a building like this? Would it make sense to say that this building is 1,000,000 grains of sand high? Well, no, because them numbers aren't very easy to work with, and it can make calculations a lot more difficult. So we use different units of measurements. And if we just look at the metric system, if we're working with something quite small, let's say less than 2 centimeters, so less than 2 pencils next to each other, we tend to use millimeters. Okay, so we get a good understanding. If we know what one pinhead is, and if something's 5 millimeters, we know it's sort of 5 pinheads on top. It gives us sort of a reference point. And then if we work with anything that's bigger than 2 centimeters and tends to be less than 100 centimeters, well, then we use the centimeters. Okay, for instance, cats and dogs, we'd most probably measure them in centimeters. Looking at the size of bricks that we use to do buildings, centimeters. And then if we get anything bigger than 100 centimeters, we're into the meter range. It's avoid to use measurements like half a meter, 3/4 of a meter. We can get a better understanding and visualize it better in our head if we say 75 centimeters, 50 centimeters. So anything bigger than a meter, but then tends to be smaller than 1,000 meters, we just stick with meters. For instance, this running track is 500 meters long, which is half a kilometer. But if we say 500 meters, we can visualize it a lot better in our head. And then anything greater than 1,000 meters, so when we hit the 1 kilometer mark, we then tend to use kilometers therefore after that. It's a very similar system when we look at the imperials. Anything small, we say inches. Anything bigger than 12 inches, we then start working in feet. And if you tend to measure your height, it tends to be in feet and inches. And then anything bigger than a couple of feet, we then start moving into yards. And then greater than yards, we start moving into miles. Now we know our different units of measurement, and I'm going to stick mainly to the metric side of it, but don't think the imperial is not important. Okay, I'm just going to work at the metric for the next couple of examples. We now need to think, when do we use millimeters, centimeters, meters, and kilometers? Well, I've already sort of broken it down, saying if it's less than 2 centimeters, we tend to work with millimeters. Greater than 100 centimeters, we tend to stick with meters. And once we've reached that 1,000 meters, we tend to move on to kilometers. However, how do we know if we're definitely using the right thing? Well, the truth is there isn't an exact answer. You're not wrong for measuring something in centimeters, even if it measures 10,000 centimeters. You're not wrong. It's just about trying to use a little bit of common sense and make maybe a more sensible decision. For instance, if we want to look at a car, we want to look at the width of the car, it makes sense for you to measure that in meters rather than millimeters. Because if we say this car is 20,000 millimeters, well, then we could sort of get the assumption it's bigger than what it actually is, when really it's more about 2 meters wide. And if we maybe look at this distance here of this road, starting from the bridge that I can see just behind the camera there, going all the way down to the end of the Navy base there. Well, that's going to be a couple of 1,000 meters, because this running track is 500 meters, and it looks like I can actually lay out more than a couple of these 500 meter running tracks. So I'd measure this distance of the road in kilometers. But again, it wouldn't be wrong if I said meters. What we are going to learn in the next lesson is how we actually convert between kilometers and meters and centimeters and millimeters. Just in case we take a measurement and later on down the road we may think, actually, that would have been better if I took it in meters rather than centimeters, or better in kilometers rather than meters. Okay? Because once again, I'm going to stress this, it doesn't mean you're wrong. It's just about maybe making that sensible choice. But if we can convert between all of them, then if we feel like we've made a mistake at the beginning, it's not such a big deal because we can easily change between them. And that's it from me today, ladies and gents. It's quite a quick one. And actually, I've not shown you a great deal. I feel like I've just been talking at you. But it's really, really important to understand these two scales of measurements. Millimeters, centimeters, meters, and kilometers, and inches, feet, yards, and miles. These are going to be very important, especially if we want to be able to answer those really in-depth GCSE questions about the distant time graph, about speed, distance, time, And actually, it will help us when we move on to look at the size of, look at capacities and weights of different items. Okay, these two different systems, they come up throughout maths, and it's really good to have a nice, strong understanding of it. So if you're sat there thinking, he hasn't shown me anything, we haven't worked anything out. No, you're quite right, we haven't. Today has just been that little bit of a discussion, looking at these two systems, where they appear and when we might use them. And hopefully, as we move on through these next few sets of lessons, you'll see why I went through these and actually why they're important to know. But I'm going to say again, next lesson, we are going to be looking at how we convert between millimeters, centimeters, meters, and kilometers. And we will have a little peek at how we can convert between the imperial system, but we're tend to be given that information in the exam, whereas this one we are not. Now, you may be wondering why I'm in my sports gear. Well, I'm at this running track, so I might as well go out and do a little bit of a jog while I'm here. But I'm pretty sure I'll only be covering a few kilometres and I won't be reaching anywhere near 100 kilometres like it states on that sign there. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next lesson when we'll look at how we can compare between these distances and a little bit of these distances. So until then, stay safe and have fun.